already lost track. We're only on day 4. Today I would like to share with you some thoughts about Prana, Pranayama, breath, the difference, the sameness between all of it, and help you understand maybe the importances, why it's considered one of our limbs, and how to apply it into your yoga practice. So the first and probably one of the most fundamental things that we want to look at is the breath in of itself. Okay, the breath is an important part of our practice. You hear instructors tell you all the time to breathe in, breathe out, hold your breath, do this, breathe through the right nostril, breathe out the left nostril, breathe really rapidly, etc., etc. And there are some variations or methods behind our madness. But the first thing is to start to even just deepen the awareness of the experience of bringing the mind into the body and joining these. Okay, so the bridge of the breath is a very effective tool to start to help you ground into where you are, into present time. And as we know that yoga is about being in the present space, in the present time, that it is joining our attention with our experience, with intention and discipline, it is going to be one of the greatest tools for us to be able to self-assess very quickly. Okay, I wanted to share a brief thing about breathing affecting everything. So breathing affects your respiratory, your cardiovascular, your neurological, your gastrointestinal, your muscular, and your psychic systems, says Donafari. It also has a general effect on your sleep. It has effect on your memory, your energy level, and your concentration. Everything you do, the pace you keep and the feeling you have, the choices you make are all influenced by the rhythmic metronome of your breathing. So Donafari wrote a book called The Breathing Book. So she's done a little bit of studying on breath and how it influences your systems. But the breath really helps you make a conscious integration between both the movement of the mind and the breath within the body. So this is what really ultimately makes yoga. Other than that, you really are just doing stretching exercises. You might be doing variations of strengthening or toning, but what makes it yoga is when we start to link those aspects collectively. Now, yoga and breathing are kind of hand in hand along this breath, okay, which is not the breath, but riding the breath is what we call this force of prana, or this life-giving energy. And this prana is what we start to look at when we look at the energetic system, the subtle anatomy of the body. Prana is what animates or brings our physical form into life. It is what creates our physical shell, which is referred to as Annamaya kosha. Okay, it's the sheath or the layer of us that is sustained with food that we feed. It is what brings it to life. It's the next step in that sort of layered multidimensional self, and it is called Pranamaya kosha. And Pranamaya kosha is responsible for creating movement, creating health, creating life. It's this magic thing that the yogi is so interested in. Okay, prana is thought when you start to become ill or injured or maybe mentally disturbed or sad or anxious or depressed or happy or joyous or content. All of these things are thought to be a direct influence of the pranic movement. So the first thing is, do we know how to breathe? One of the biggest revelations that we have when we first start a yoga practice is, I haven't been breathing right my entire life, and who knew? Breathing is a very unconscious act. It's something that our entire body does all the time, whether or not we think about it. It is something that we can survive for mere minutes without doing. We can go for long periods of time without food. We can go for long periods of time without sleep. We can go for long periods of time without eating, but we can literally go minutes without breathing. And so it's the very first thing we do when we are birthed. It is the very last thing we do before we go. And so prana, this life-giving force that rides breath, is most easily influenced by how we breathe. Where we choose to put our attention, our energy goes, prana moves towards. So within our body, we have all sorts of different winds moving. We have upward movement winds, and you'll see this when we belch. We have downward movement winds that I think might be a little bit self-explanatory, but it helps to defecate. It helps to let things go out. We have expanding and contracting winds. And so these winds and how they move keep our systems healthy. So the first thing is, do I know how to breathe? Okay, most of us are chest breathers. And over time, when we chest breathe, the intercostal muscles between the ribs start to become small, and it becomes even more challenging to deep breathe. Okay, so one thing is when we breathe up into our chest a lot, chest breathing creates a lot of chronic tension. Chest breathing creates digestional issues, and it also creates a lot of anxiety. Okay, so learning how to deep breathe is very important. Now, another challenge that we could experience is that we tend to be reverse breathers. So instead of, in your yogic breathing, you begin at your belly and you fill up to the collarbones on the inhale, and the exhale goes downwards. Some of us might experience the inhale happening more up here and then working down, and then vice versa. And when we do this, we're actually pushing energy in the opposite direction that we do when we're starting to learn diaphragmatic breathing. And as a result, again, we experience different variations of chronic tension. We're going to start to usually experience digestive issues as well, insomnia, because we're bringing energy up a little bit too high, and we're not effectively grounding and the ending of the breath. And then on top of that, you might also start to experience high blood pressure. So that if you're a reverse breather, that's not a good thing either. Chest breather. And then the other one, which a lot of us are really brought into when we start to practice the yoga, is unconscious stress breathing. Okay, so stress breathing would be changes in our breath when our mental state changes. Okay, when our mental state changes. So that we're looking at things like holding our breath, short or quick breaths. We're looking at things like really short exhalations. Those are experiences of stress breathing. And they usually come at times when we're agitated, when we're angry, when, again, we're anxious, maybe at times we're watching somebody go by, or when we might be depressed or sad. So those are some of the challenges that we may feel in just figuring out how to breathe first and foremost. So the yoga practice kind of brings it right into the foreground. Okay, this is what our breathing is like, and we just start to notice. Okay, so breathing and breath fundamentals, how we breathe, how we should be breathing, as just a basic breath training is step one. And then you go into yogic breathing. Okay, so yogic breathing is, okay, now we have an idea of what it literally feels to breathe. Breathe mindfully and breathe consciously, where we're actually paying attention to our breath. It gives our mind an immediate permission to calm down and to focus and to just be a little bit more quiet and still. Okay, so that's the great first step with yogic breathing. But then we start to learn how to direct the breath more intentionally, where it's very subtle, where it's very specific, where it's got certain lengths, where the exhalation starts to be twice as long as the inhalation, so that we're really sure we're letting go, where we start to notice how balanced the breath is, both on inhale and on exhalation, in force-wise. So there's no more gasping for the beginning of the breath and petering it in at the end, or letting it out in big huffs. So that is steady. Another thing that happens with the breath is that we start to see it as an immediate representation of our mental state. So when I'm agitated in my breath, I immediately go to my mind. I'm like, whoa, look what's going on there. There's agitation as well. And so we can start to reflect on our breath to help us better understand our mental state. And when the breath is steady, then so too is the mind. And I'll go so far even to say here, that once you start to establish yourself in just understanding how you breathe and the benefits of breathing and the ways that you can breathe, that's step one. Now you're learning how to breathe, okay? And we're going to start to consciously go into our breath, which means we're noticing every part of our breath. then we start to feel what we call prana. This is where we start to feel the energetics of the body. We start to feel how energy moves, and we get a sense of how things are going because we're directionally breathing. We're attuning our awareness to it. And then you move into what we call the limb pranayama. Okay, so pranayama, in some aspects, is thought that we don't do pranayama until you've had at least a couple of years of asana practice, because the asana practice just teaches you how to base breathe and to breathe correctly and to breathe so that you do not introduce pranayama techniques until you have ease in the body and ease in the asana. Some will teach pranayama in conjunction with the postures right from the beginning. But pranayama is learning how to control the influence or movements of energy in the body. So we're going to start to practice in that aspect breath retention. It's referred to as kumbhaka. So we, at the beginning of the breath and at the end of the breath, we're paying attention to that short space in between when the breath changes. Retention, again, is thought to be a very high practice, and it's a practice that you need to have the discipline first and foremost before you start to hold breath, because it can be very confused with holding the breath in the sense where your body is not at ease. So you need to know the difference. So pranayama is starting to generally move energy in the body. Okay, so I hope that helped you understand the difference between breath and breathing fundamentals, basic breath training, and yogic breathing. Prana and pranayama. Okay, they are all different, but they are all interfaced with one another. And the very first thing we need to do is breathe. Okay, I'm going to finish with a quote by BKS Iyengar, and it's from his translation of the Hatha Yoga Pradipika. And the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, as translated by BKS Iyengar, says, "When the breath is irregular, the mind waves. And when the breath is steady, so too is the mind. To attain steadiness, the yogi must restrain his breath." Happy challenge!